Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Love Meets Literature. Today's episode is going to be all about our bookish icks, our bookish hot takes, whatever you want to call it. But before we begin, I am your host, Rachel, and you can find me on Instagram at Paperbacks and Sketchbooks.
And I am your other host, Joe, and you can find us at Love Meets Literature.
Please do give us a follow. You can find us literally on every corner of the internet. It will help us immensely. So, how's it going? How's ACOTAR? How's Sea of Monsters?
Well, I finished Sea of Monsters, and it was honestly better than I remembered it. I forgot how much I liked Sea of Monsters, and I liked all of the characters and like the story that takes place in it. It was super good. And the ending was incredible as well. So it really makes me want to just dive in to the next Percy Jackson. However, I'm focusing on ACOTAR now. And ACOTAR has gotten really interesting. I'm at the part, so spoilers if you haven't read ACOTAR yet.
Well, it's not spoilers for me.
Right, but for anybody else. I'm at the part now where she has been, Feyre that is, has gone back to her home.
Yes.
I guess, yeah, her original home. She doesn't call it her home anymore, but whatever. Besides that, like, in the story, though, I've really enjoyed it. I have a lot of feelings about the situations that she's been through, but I'm going to save that until I actually finish the book because I want to make sure that I have, like, the full grasp on it before I start giving my opinion on it.
Yes, you definitely have to get to the end. So, let's see. I can never really remember what order events happen in books after I finish them, but did you get past I think it was the Calanmai part, their celebration?
Yeah, the one where they were like, you better stay inside, and she doesn't, and she gets in trouble.
She should have stayed inside.
Yeah. And then there was the whole other party that happened, I can't remember what it was called, but it was just like a normal kind of shindig. And then there was the dinner or the lunch where I'm not sure how to say his name. Reese, I think is what it is.
Reese, yeah.
Yeah, he showed up and then caused a bunch of problems. And then that's when they sent her away. It's very interesting. They had their intimate moment, which was extremely cringeworthy to read, not going to lie.
It's okay, you can skip over it.
Yeah.
So how would you rate it so far?
Like on a scale of like stars?
Sure, yeah, let's say on a star scale, how would you rate it so far without having finished it yet?
Without having finished it, I think it's like a 3.5, I feel like.
Okay.
There's been parts where I like read it and it just drops. And then there's like the actual like lore and story, I think is really awesome. Like you can tell that, the author spent a lot of time building a very intricate world. And I really love that aspect. But then the like kissy romance, I'm like, I'm not a huge fan of that. But, what can I expect, right? It's a romantasy, so.
It is a romantasy. You knew that going in.
Right, so I'm not trying to be like a hater on that part. But right now, I think it's like a 3.5. Very easily could go up to a 4.
Okay, that's not bad. I think the first time I read ACOTAR, the first book, I rated it a 4. But my second time around, I rated it a 5.
I think you've mentioned before that there's like a lot of foreshadowing and things like that in there. And I can definitely see, because a lot of times when I go back and like watch a movie, for example, and I see all the foreshadowing to the ending or maybe the second movie or something, it definitely changes my opinion. So I definitely could see that.
It makes it so much better.
Right. It adds like a layer of reread ability, which is fun.
It does. And I think that's why her books are so popular, because you can just reread them forever and ever and ever and ever. And there's always little details that you may not have noticed in a previous read, which I think makes it so much fun.
Right. There is a detail so I'm reading your physical book, and this was your reread version. So there's some underlined things. There is one thing that you didn't underline that I think is like a red herring, and so I'm gonna finish the book out, and then I'm gonna see if it ends up being one. So
Well, I got lazy towards the end with underlining, so it's possible I may have noticed whatever it is you're talking about, but
yeah,
I was just too lazy to take out the pen, take out the ruler, and underline it in a straight line.
you do mark everything perfectly straight, so I could definitely see that.
There are some instances where my underlines are like little squiggles because movement, cars, planes, vehicles, the pen just goes wherever it wants.
I think most of them were pretty neat.
Well, I recently finished up The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. I'm not sure if you remember talking about it on our Book of the Month episode for August.
Yes, I do remember.
It was the food one.
Right. The food one with the European trip or Spain trip, something like that.
Yes, the European Food and Wine Tour. I actually ended up rating it 4.5 stars.
Oh, wow.
It was very much a vibes kind of book because the plot wasn't super strong. It was mainly just focusing on the food. The food was very descriptive, by the way. Like, it was names that I could not pronounce.
Oh, so it was like formal descriptions almost.
Yes, a lot of that. And the focus was also on our main characters, Theo and Kit, and their sort of second chance love story. But I did find the food to be front and center, which was interesting. I've never read a book like it. And I will say the synopsis was pretty accurate to what happens in the book, which is them having a hookup competition. So that did happen. And I don't know, I just got good vibes from the book.
That's good. Nothing wrong with that.
Sometimes I can only write a book based on vibes, but the descriptions were good, great imagery, the tourist destinations were described super well. I did find those to be a tad wordy though. I feel like the author could have toned down the tourist spot descriptions a little bit because I don't always need like a step-by-step of a character exploring a spot.
Yeah.
So that kind of dragged for me a little bit, and that's kind of what knocked it down a star. But overall, it was whatever the synopsis says for it is what you are getting in the book. So
I mean, that's usually exactly what you want. So
I know, but at the same time, I kind of feel like the synopsis might have given a little too much away because I was expecting everything in the synopsis, and then the book like literally met my expectations to a T.
I see what you're saying. It's like when a movie does that thing where they put all the funny or cool scenes in the trailer.
Yeah.
And you're like, this looks good. And then you go and see it and you're like, oh, well, I already like saw all this because it was in the trailer.
Yes.
Yeah.
I also liked that we got points of views from both characters. So we had Theo's point of view at the beginning, and then the ending wrapped up with Kit's point of view. So we got to see their version of events. There was a whole big miscommunication thing in there when they actually broke up, and it was just like, oh my goodness, we could have avoided all of this if you two just talked to each other 4 years ago. But it's fine. It made for a good story. Great representation in the book. It was great. I loved it. I now want to go on a European food and wine tour.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
But I don't want to go with my ex.
Yeah, don't want to participate in a hookup competition.
Not at all. Not at all.
Yeah, I'll pass on that one. I'll take the food and the wine.
That I will. I will take the food and the wine, and I'll take Spain and Italy and France.
Agreed.
So 4.5 stars for The Pairing by Casey McQuiston. And other than that, I'm still kind of a little slumpish. Haven't really felt like reading much, but I'm gonna try and get like back in the groove of reading. I don't know what it's been about the month of August, but I've just been so like blah.
That's fair. I think it's the heat.
It's been so hot, and it's the end of summer, and then you start spiraling and you're like, oh my God, I did nothing this summer.
Yeah.
Even though we did a lot of things.
I know, but it always, the ending of summer always reminds you, you're like, I could have done 10,000 more things this summer.
I know. And then you're like, well, I guess there's next summer.
Yeah.
So hopefully September, I can get my act together and start reading how I used to read.
Well, it'll be like fall time, and so it'll be nice and like, you know, can make it cozy.
Yeah, but
and you're like a mood vibes based person, so once it's nice and cozy and cool outside, You get like a nice drink, light a candle.
But it's still going to be really, really hot.
I'm trying to will it into existence that it won't be that hot.
You know what? Let's just manifest fall weather. First week of September. Let's do it.
Sweaters, jeans, sweatpants.
Yes.
That's the vibe.
That is the vibe. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be below 80 degrees.
Probably not, but we can hope.
We can hope. Yep, we can. So today's episode, Bookish Icks or Bookish Hot Takes, however you want to imply what we are going to be talking about. So an ick, if you are unfamiliar, it's like just something that kind of makes you, in my opinion, squeamish. You don't really enjoy it. It's like if you look at something and you're like, oh, that's an ick for me. It's like not gross per se, but
yeah,
you don't vibe with it.
It's like that bad taste in your mouth kind of deal, where it's not necessarily gross or disgusting. I guess it could be, but it's more along the lines of like a visceral reaction.
Yes. So I feel like the word ick has come into existence in the past couple of years via social media because everyone likes to talk about their icks regarding relationships online.
Yeah, that's kind of where it originated from.
However, we are going to be talking about our icks about books and bookish things, bookish community things, just, hot takes, if you will. But I just think bookish icks sounds better.
Yeah, I think it's got a nice ring to it.
It's trendy. The Gen Zers out there will relate to some bookish icks.
There you go.
But before we get into our bookish icks, you recently made this ginormous loaf of bread.
Yes, it is huge.
And I need you to talk about it.
So I followed the recipe that is in the Basics with Babish cookbook, and it's called pan cubano, and it's supposed to be traditional Cuban bread for the Cuban sandwich. So a Cuban sandwich is like basically bread, I think it's like ham, provolone maybe, mustard and pickles, and then they put it in this bread, and they usually panini press it down and toast it. But the bread itself is just supposed to be like very soft on the inside, and it's supposed to hold its structure and be very like springy and bounce back, and then the outside is supposed to be just hard enough to be able to really hold on to it like a sandwich, and it's sort of designed to be toasted in either like grilled on a flat top or in a panini press, or even like open face and maybe putting some butter on it and grilling it like that. But it's super easy to make. The recipe that was in the cookbook was very simple to follow, and it wasn't like one of those things where you had to make some interpretations or kind of understand deep bread making skills. It was literally just throw it in, turn on your stand mixer, let it go. The hardest part was like rolling it up, but that was still even relatively simple. But it turned out super well, and it was also way bigger than I expected it to be. It was huge.
It is huge. I was not expecting it to be as big as it is.
Yeah, it's easily like 20 inches long, probably 18 to 20 inches long. And I mean, a round is like, it's quite big. It's like if you had a football and deflated a little bit of one half, it really feels like that. It's ginormous. And it's like heavy. Like when you pick this thing up, it's got some weight to it.
It is a hefty loaf, but it is really good.
Yes, it tastes fantastic. It came out virtually exactly how I wanted it to. There's like very small critiques I would make, which would really just be the temperature of the oven, but that's about it.
Yeah, no, it turned out super well, and now I need you to keep making bread because I feel like this is a good omen that like future loaves are going to turn out just as well.
I mean, I hope so. Bread is a pretty tricky endeavor.
It is, but next you have to try making just normal sandwich bread.
Yep, that's the next one that's on the list. I will say, if there is somebody out there that's interested in making bread, this recipe, if you have a stand mixer, it was very, very simple.
Well, I'm glad you can make bread because I know if I tried to make bread, it would not turn out well at all. So are you ready to get into some icks?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, all right. I have some very, very hot takes. People might not agree with me, but that is okay. We can agree to disagree.
Mine are like very mild, so I don't feel like a lot of people are going to disagree with mine, but I still, for me, they're more icks than they are hot takes.
Mine are kind of both.
Okay,
Like, it's a hot take, but it's an ick for me.
gotcha.
So, my first one is chapter titles.
Is this like you don't want them? You just want it to say like chapter 10?
Correct. I do not like chapter titles. Like, if someone writes out a sentence as their chapter title,
Why not?
because sometimes it spoils things that are going to happen.
Oh, okay.
Like, if the author gives the chapter a title, it's usually something that has to do with whatever's in the chapter.
Right.
I don't want to know what's going to happen in the middle of the chapter. I want to read and I want to find it out.
I see what you're saying. I did notice that in the Percy Jackson books, they would make like the title of the chapter would be something to allude to what is happening in the chapter. Typically, they were vague enough to where it didn't really matter, but I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I find chapter titles are mostly in children's and young adult books. They're not too common in adult novels, but sometimes I run into them and I'm like, oh no, we have chapter titles.
Is it like a deal breaker for you?
No, I'll still read the book, but I'll ignore the title.
Oh, okay.
I just wish the title wasn't there. Because I mean, obviously, my eyes do still see the title,
Well, yeah.
but chapter titles, to me, they're just like a fun little extra that an author can add, but it doesn't add value for me.
That's fair. I guess I never really thought about it too much. I think if they were to add sort of spoilers, then I would definitely feel the same way that you do.
Right. And I'm not talking like they add spoilers necessarily to the chapter titles. I'm talking just like major themes.
Yeah, I think now that I think more about it though, it's like almost anything you put there is going to be a little bit spoilery or, alluding to something. So I get what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah, so chapter titles are a big no for me. I also don't like long chapters. Like super long chapters, I'm talking like 20 plus pages.
Yeah, I'm on the same boat. I'd rather have short chapters.
Like, I love Karen Slaughter. I love her books, but her chapters are like 30 pages long.
Yeah, that's a lot of chapter.
She is the queen of long chapters, which sometimes I guess a long chapter is necessary, but at the same time, you could probably break it up into like 2 chapters.
Yeah, I feel like a chapter usually indicates a change in scene.
Mm-hmm.
So to be in one scene for a very long time can get monotonous pretty quickly.
True. Well, what gets me too is sometimes there will be little page breaks within the chapter, but it won't be a whole new chapter. It's just like the same chapter, which I get for like storytelling, resetting, whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't need a 30-page long chapter.
No, yeah, I completely agree.
It makes it hard for me to put down the book then, like starting and stopping, because then if I'm in a time crunch, I can't start a new chapter if I only have like 20 minutes. I have to have a full hour to read one chapter.
Yeah, I don't have that much of a problem with that because I'm psychotic and I'll just stop in the middle of a chapter.
You see, I can't do that. I can't stop in the middle of a chapter unless there's a paragraph break, like a full break, not just like going from one paragraph to the other, like a whole line break in there.
I just sometimes like I will be reading and I will simply just get bored of what I've been reading and then I just throw the bookmark in, shut the book, and then I'll come back to it later.
I can't do that because then I never remember where on the page I stopped. And then I just end up rereading the whole page.
Oh, that's fair. I definitely do that. For me, it's like the cost of doing business, though. I'm making the decision to pause here, so I'll just reread the page.
And I just power through the chapter. It's what I have to do. But I can't do that with long chapters. So what's an ick of yours?
My first big one is, since I like to read a lot of action, it's unrealistic fight scenes.
Okay.
Especially if it's supposed to be a realistic story, like take place in present day. There's no fantasy elements or anything to it. Nobody's got like superpowers. And they're tumbling down and getting harmed or something, way beyond what a normal person is capable of, that stuff is just really frustrating and sort of pulls you out, especially if the whole rest of the book was very focused on being as realistic as possible. I noticed it a little bit with the Victor the Assassin series. There was like a couple of things where he fell out like a window and landed onto a car. And it wasn't that high up. So you're like, okay, realistically, sure, someone could survive that. But then he just like jumped up immediately and went back to fighting these guys. And you're like, dude, you would be knocked out or something. Like that would hurt.
But they do that in movies too. So is that not an ick for you in a movie?
No, I also hate it in movies. The best example of that is John Wick 1 versus John Wick 2. In John Wick 1, all of the fighting scenes and all the everything in terms of the action was like very realistic. They did a really good job with making it extremely real and something that could actually happen. And then as it progressed to John Wick 2, there was some stuff that like kind of pulled you out of it. There was things that he was doing that just like would never happen in real life. There's a really good example, I believe it was in John Wick 2, with them like shooting each other back and forth in a crowded subway, but because they're had like silencers on their guns, nobody heard them. And like in real life, if you know anything about guns, that's not realistic at all. And then there's like a scene in the third movie where he tumbles down a fire escape, hitting his back like 10 times in a row. And you're like, anybody in real life would have their back completely destroyed. There's no way this guy gets up. And then he just like gets up and stumbles away.
Well, I feel like the point of doing that with books and movies is, I don't know, you can make your character do whatever they want to do. Like if they can survive this, then I guess so be it.
I see why people do it. It's like to ramp up the action and, make it way more intense and everything like that. But at the same time, I just always go back to like, if we're focusing on the realism, I think it detaches from it. It's kind of a good example of someone doing it right was in like the old Chrome box set that I read. There's like this sci-fi futuristic element to the story. Like there's certain people with like bionic cyborg type augments. So then now when they get thrown out of a building and land on something and they get up, you can believe it because, maybe they've got some cyborg going on in them, or the character will make a comment about, oh, he must be augmented or something along those lines. So
yeah, in a sci-fi or a fantasy, I expect the characters to be able to withstand brutal violence like that.
yeah, exactly. But in my realistic, crime drama books or something like that, I want it to be realistic. If someone gets shot in that, that creates such a more intense scenario because now you're thinking of all the realistic things that happen, like going into shock or bleeding out or something. But if they're just like, oh yeah, I got shot, I'm fine. And it's like, okay, well, there's no more drama now. You're totally fine.
Right. That's true. That's true. Okay. I see your point.
So I guess maybe not unrealistic, but you have to match your environment.
Yes, that is important. So another ick slash hot take, I guess this is both for me. And this kind of has to do with book reviews. When somebody does not finish a book, they declare it a DNF, a did not finish. And their reasoning is everything that was stated in the synopsis. It just rubs me the wrong way because why did you pick it up? So for example, this actually surfaced the other day when I was scrolling Instagram and I saw someone post that they DNF'd the pairing because it was a second chance romance and the only things that seemingly happened were the food and wine tour and the main characters hooking up with other people, which, if you remember the synopsis, those two things are very much said in the synopsis.
So then I guess this person read it and was like, I'm done.
They didn't even finish it because of those things.
Yeah, I don't really know what they expected.
I don't know what they expected either because the synopsis kind of laid out, like I said earlier, literally everything that happened in the book was the synopsis.
Yeah, it's like the surprise Pikachu meme. You read the synopsis and it's like, then you read the book and you're like, what? It's about the synopsis? It's like, yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah, duh. So I just saw that and I had to roll my eyes and be like, are you serious? If you don't vibe with those things, don't read the book.
Yeah, that's true. I guess the like devil's advocate here is kind of what you said earlier, which is like maybe they were hoping there was more to the
True.
book than the synopsis, but
True. I mean, there's a lot of instances where the synopsis is vague and it gives you a general idea of what is going to happen. It's
right.
not like this synopsis for the pairing where it was very much, this is exactly what you're getting. So I can understand that they may have been expecting a little more oomph from the book itself, and it did not deliver on that front. But at the same time, it just made me kind of laugh that their reasoning for DNFing was the synopsis.
Yeah, I think I would feel the same. I would just kind of be like,
I mean,
shrug my
I didn't
shoulders.
comment anything because I'm not that person who's going to start discourse on a post.
Well, right, everybody has their own opinion.
Right. Like, I mean, that's your opinion, but did you read the synopsis? So that's now a new thing for me because I do read people's reasonings for not finishing books. And a lot of the times, like, I can see it, like, it's valid. But sometimes I'm like, okay, you're not vibing with it. I get it. I'm a mood reader too.
Right.
But usually I feel like I have a substantial reason for not finishing a book. There is a one off case for me, though, where sometimes I'm just like, I'm not in the mood for it, but I don't declare it a DNF. I'm like, I'm going to put it back, but I'll read it again when I'm in the mood for it.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah, I can't think of a time that I've ever picked up a book, read a review or the synopsis or something, and then like read the book and been like, what the heck? That's the same thing as the synopsis. I've always just been like, yep, this is exactly what I was looking for, which is why I decided to read it.
Right. And I guess we're similar on that front, but some people expect more, which
True.
is understandable.
And I guess if, you were reading like outside your comfort zone and you decided to try something, I guess I could see from that perspective, but still the overall what you're talking about, I agree
Right.
with.
And what got me too was this person also said, I don't typically like second chance romance. I'm like, well, then you picked up a book that literally said second chances in the synopsis.
Yeah, I think you set yourself up for failure, to be honest, if you are that person.
Now, sometimes I do the same thing. I will pick up a book that has a trope that I don't usually enjoy just to see if I may like it. So,
Right. You never know.
it's possible this person did the same thing, but it just unlocked this new ick for me, DNFing books because of what was directly stated in the synopsis.
I think that's actually a great example of what I feel like a true ick is, though, is like nobody even did anything wrong. This person is totally entitled to their own opinion, but just like it activated that little thing inside of your brain that's just like, why? Like, what? Like, you know what I mean? That's kind of what an
Yeah.
ick is for me.
Yep. No, you nailed it there.
My next one is I specified action sequences that don't make sense, but I actually want to open this up to just like kind of all sequences that don't make sense. And what I mean by that is like sometimes this will happen in a spicy scene or a particularly romantic scene, but also a lot of the times action scenes where they're talking about hands here, weapons here, whatever the scene might be, and then it just like doesn't make sense. Like a good example was I was reading an action book quite a while ago. It was actually in the third Law trilogy that I had to read like 3 times over because they mentioned like a sword swinging and hitting this person. It was like a significant person. And then all of a sudden there was like a wound to them. And then they mentioned later when they were getting like patched up that the wound was somewhere else. And I was like, what? Did I miss something? And I had to like go back and reread it. I ended up being incorrect, so that was my bad, but I have seen that happen in other places too. Like especially with I've noticed it in romantic scenes. They'll be like this hand was here or, we were sitting on this and then next thing you know, they're like doing something totally different or totally somewhere else and it just doesn't make sense like how someone can contort to those levels or something along those lines.
Yeah, I don't really think too much about those things. I kind of just go with it in a book, action scenes or otherwise.
Well, are you someone that like pictures the scene in your head?
I do, depending on the scene,
Because like it really affects me with action scenes.
because I don't really get good images of action scenes in my head because I'm not familiar with how all of that is. I don't watch a ton of movies. I don't
I
watch a
see.
ton of action television. All I get action wise is from fantasy novels. And so when I do try to picture it, I mean, obviously in my head, it never makes any sense because I can never understand where one character is in position to another character in a fight scene. So I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to go with the words. And my brain is able to interpret the words.
Right.
Like I can understand a fight scene is happening and this guy's there and this guy's there and they're battling these people. But if I were to draw out a diagram of where these people are and like what they are doing, I would not be able to do it.
Okay, so that's definitely the big difference between us because I'm drawing the diagram like in my head the whole time.
Yeah, no. But any other scene, like if it's just like two people walking down the street and it describes storefronts and whatever, I can easily picture them walking down a street because
Right.
I'm familiar with what that would look like.
You're familiar with walking down the street.
I am familiar with walking down streets.
But I think even in those simple times, I still notice it too. Like if there's a scene walking down the street and they're like hand in hand, and for some reason the author decides to specify that maybe the gentleman is on, the closer side to the street and the lady is on the closer side to the windows or something, and they're talking about it. And then all of a sudden he's against the windows to like help open the door for somebody. To me, it just like creates a confusing. I'm like, how did he get there so quickly? Or maybe it did happen, but they're just not saying it. Sometimes it's contextual, but
A lot of those things are inferences. So the author depends on the reader to infer that he stepped either behind or in front of his wife who's walking beside him to open the door for either her or somebody else.
right. I just like how we've evolved now. It's his wife. Like we're making our own story.
Oh, did you not say
I just
it was
said a
his
man
wife?
and a woman, and then now you're like, it's his wife. Just keep expounding on that story.
I inferred that she was his wife.
There you go. I guess you're just better at inferences than I am. Maybe that's my problem.
Maybe you just need to study English a little bit more.
Okay. All right. What's your next one?
So mine actually kind of trails off of yours, where I don't like things to be too wordy or too descriptive. I find that to be an ick because I don't need to know everything a character is doing step by step. And I actually wrote right here on our little show notes, that's what inferring is for.
That's very funny. I can't believe we both have like an opposite ick almost.
We do, kind of, because I just think stories can drag on and on and on if the author writes word for word what somebody is doing. Like she wakes up in the morning, she brushes her teeth, she washes her face, she goes to the kitchen, she gets breakfast, blah, blah, blah. I don't need to know all of that word for word.
Right.
I can infer that if she gets up in the morning, she's doing her morning routine, and then she's in the kitchen doing whatever.
I think that's fair. I guess the big difference for me is it depends on what's actually happening.
Well, obviously, it depends on the context and whatever, but I prefer reading books where the author uses surrounding context clues, as they would say in English classes, to allow the reader to make an inference of what is happening.
Now, do you find that to happen a lot in like first person books?
First person books, I find that it goes more step by step.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm reading a third person point of view, I find that it doesn't directly state everything that a character is doing.
Yeah, because I noticed that as soon as I picked up Akotar, it felt like I knew or I was being told every little thing that Pharaoh was doing or every little thing that was happening in a scene, which I actually, like I mentioned, kind of enjoy.
The thing with first person, so first person, we're not only getting the actions of the characters, we're getting their inner dialogue.
Right.
So, of course, your inner dialogue, sometimes you think to yourself what your next move is. So, first person, I feel like it's just natural that we get more descriptions
Right.
of a setting, of a surrounding area. Third person, I feel like we do get the same descriptions of like settings, but I'm not getting every little nitpicky detail of what somebody is doing.
Yeah, I guess that's true now that I think about it. They tend to spend a lot of time just talking about the environment and the characters interacting with the environment rather than sort of the inner monologue, like you mentioned, where that can get very detailed and step by step.
Right. So I prefer more show, less tell.
I think that's fair.
I don't need to be told everything.
Now, have you found a book that took that to the extreme? Like you felt like you didn't know enough information?
Not off the top of my head.
Because I would be interested to see if there's something out there that you were like, I was totally lost trying to read this.
I'm sure there have been books where I felt like that, but I could not name one off the top of my head.
Well, I guess we'll just have to keep an eye out.
But there have been a lot of books where I feel like they just drag on and on and on and could definitely be shorter because they're telling me every little thing.
That's fair. I could see that. All right, I guess we can go on to my next one, which is the miscommunication trope. I cannot stand this. It is, in my opinion, one of, if not the worst trope for me because it's so frustrating to deal with.
I think everybody out there hates the miscommunication trope. Okay. At least everyone that I'm friends with on Instagram, they are not a fan of miscommunication.
So then let me take it to the next level, which is, I don't know if this is a trope in the book world, but it's definitely a trope in the movie world, which is like the main character is self-creating problems. So if you were to take out the main character just being an idiot, there would actually have been no plot to the movie or the story because nothing would have happened.
I have read a lot of thrillers like that, and it is very annoying.
Yeah, like horror movie has that trope a lot where it's like, we'll just buy the haunted house, even though it's very clearly haunted, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm not a fan when books purposely have a main character make stupid decisions just to further whatever their end goal is. Even in romance books, sometimes, like you'll get like an inner dialogue from a character being like, I know I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I mean, it depends how it's done, but most of the time I end up not enjoying plot lines like that.
I remember very distinctly back in high school when we had to do our, like, we had silent reading time, which normally was like a middle school thing, but we also did that in high school. And I remember there was 2 different books that I wanted to try to read. And the first one, I read like 50 pages, and then I realized it was a miscommunication trope. And so I shut the book and I put it away. I was like, I'm not even going to try it.
Now, was it miscommunication or just no communication? Because no communication to me is worse than miscommunication. Like the characters aren't even talking to each other.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
When they know that they should.
If I'm remembering correctly, it was miscommunication. It was like one character heard the other character talking behind closed doors, but they only heard like half of the conversation.
That.
Yeah, and so I just shut the book and I was like, nah, I'm good. I'm just going to lay my head down in class. And then the next book that I tried was the other trope I mentioned, where it was just like the whole plot to the book was the main character unleashed a demon or something like that when he could have just not done it. Like he could have just walked away and it would have not changed anything in his life.
But there are people out there where, if they see a button that says do not push, they have to push the button.
Right. But like, I'm not trying to be mean, but it's just lazy storytelling, in my opinion. Just make something else happen. Add another evil character, like anything. Don't make the main character be the bad guy, in a sense. Unless maybe that's like the plot of your story, but just for him to be like a good example is the Spider-Man movies, the newest ones with Tom Holland. If you go back and watch them, every single one of them, the problem is caused by Tom, by Spider-Man.
That's true.
A
Yeah.
great example, spoilers, is in the first movie, they were going to catch the big bad guy. They had a sting operation ready to go, and if Spider-Man had just stayed out of it, they would have caught him. The whole thing would have been fine. Nobody would have gotten hurt. However, he decided to intervene despite everyone telling him not to, and he ruined it and caused a bunch of problems.
Sometimes people also think that the decision that they are making is the right one, even when it's not.
I mean, I guess I from the outside perspective, I'm obviously getting all the information as where the character is not. I'm not even mad at the character. I'm like mad at the author. Like, I think it's just, you could write that in a better way, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can agree. Miscommunication is definitely something I try to avoid. And characters doing stupid things, obviously, don't really enjoy that.
No.
But sometimes it can be interesting. Now, one thing that I really don't enjoy is when books include spicy scenes that do nothing to further a plot. You do not need a spicy scene in your thriller book. Like, you don't need a spicy scene in your action and adventure book. You just don't need them in every single book. And I feel like they've been popping up in every single genre recently, and I'm kind of over it because I'm like, we don't need this like random hookup. We don't need this random romance side thing unless it's specifically a romance book or a romantasy, or there's some sort of inkling of romance mentioned in your synopsis.
Right.
Because I know a lot of people out there, they don't want to read that. They want to avoid that. They want clean. They want clean books. And you can't, I feel like you shouldn't just randomly be throwing it in there for no reason.
Yeah. The First Law trilogy has a storyline between two characters where it's about their like romance and their draw to each other. So, you know, when you have two characters that are written that way, you know, their story is about the draw to each other, and there's a spicy scene. Duh, that makes sense. Even if your whole rest of your book is not necessarily about that, that's fine. But then in that same trilogy, there's two characters where they seem to like each other, but it always, to me, it felt more like a friendship, not anything more. And then like they have a spicy scene and you're just like, oh geez, this is ill-timed.
Yeah, the ones that are like just randomly out of nowhere, like character meets another character, they just go at it, and I'm like, where there's no build up here. This is not part of the storyline. I mean, maybe it could be part of a storyline for a character's decisions or whatever. I don't know, but I've come across them definitely in books before, and I'm like, this was so not needed.
Yeah, and I think sometimes people can just show a little restraint and just do the classic like fade to black style thing, you know?
Yeah, I've read a lot of books that are just, they call them closed door, where they just allude to it happening, but they never actually, they don't go into detail.
Yeah, I think if you like really have the desire for two characters to hook up, I don't know why people don't exercise that restraint anymore.
Yeah, I mean, not to sound like a bunch of prudes over here, but I feel like spicy scenes have their place in the romance world, the romantasy world. Just
Right.
leave them out of my normal thriller books, please.
I mean, I am reading ACOTAR and you've already read it. So
yeah, but
it's not like
ACOTAR,
we're not familiar with it.
ACOTAR is a romantasy. It's expected. It's
Right.
known that it is spicy.
That's what I'm saying, is like that's the point, right? That's where you would expect it and you go, okay, I know what's going to happen.
Right. Like my big thing here is like if there's no mention of anything like that happening whatsoever in your
Right.
synopsis or whatever, that's when I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah. Oh, we're going here now. All right.
So that's a little bit of an ick for me. And then another one of my icks is if you see somebody raving about a book on social media, don't be the party pooper and comment saying that you absolutely hated it.
Yeah. I think this can apply to a lot of things, just like unneeded negativity.
Yes. And I mean, obviously, this could be a hot take because some people could argue, oh, it is social media. I can post my opinions. Sometimes your opinion is not needed here.
True.
especially if the poster is not asking for opinions. Like they're literally just posting their book review. Like, I loved this book so much. Or they're doing a book feature. Like, this was amazing. Like, highly recommend. And someone comments, like, I do not recommend. I hated it. Like, what is the point of that?
Yeah, I also think if somebody really didn't like something, there's a much better way to express that you didn't like it without just being downright negative.
The only times that I will comment stuff like that on people's posts, or the only times where I am welcoming to that stuff on my own posts, is
Right.
either they specifically ask a question in the caption, have you read this? Did you enjoy it? My response would be like, yeah, I have. Unfortunately, I didn't like it, but I'm glad you did. You don't have to be
Right.
like, oh, I hated it. You can be nice about it.
That's what I'm saying. Like, you can phrase it in a way that isn't like bashing on everything. Oh, I hated it. This was terrible. Don't recommend. Like, you could just say exactly what you said. Unfortunately, I didn't like that much, but I'm glad you did. Or, I'd recommend it if you're looking for this and this kind of story, but
Right. And like, not every book is for every audience.
right, exactly.
It's just common sense, people. So if you are just spewing negativity on someone's like super positive, oh, I love this post, I'm like, I don't like you very much.
Wow, bold words there.
Bold words. Remember, we agreed to disagree.
That's fair.
So
If you're somebody that's like, I really want to comment a negative thing here for some reason, I can't imagine wanting to do that, but I just like, that's what I assume these people want to do, right? So like, why wouldn't you just post your own review and just be like, yeah, I didn't like it that much. There you go.
right. I mean, there's also this thing called like self-restraint, and you can just not say what's on your mind.
That's a good thing to practice.
You can keep scrolling. You can scroll.
Or you can do like we did and combine it into a nice little document and talk about it as an ick.
You can just make a podcast and just talk about all the things you hate.
Yeah. You know what? Why not?
Not my kind of thing. Although
No.
maybe that's kind of what we're doing right now.
You also
but...
might, conjure a very negative audience. Keep that in mind if you're just talking about, well, who knows? Maybe they're all like, yeah, dude, you're so smart. I hate that too.
True. Yeah.
You never know.
And this isn't necessarily something I hate. It's just
No, that's true.
ick. It gives me the heebie-jeebies. I don't like it. So if you see somebody's very positive Instagram post, please do not comment any negativity. That's unsolicited. It will give me the ick.
I've got one. This one I think everybody cannot stand. But mine is the no time to explain trope, I guess you would call it, where a side character or even the main character pulls up or drives up or shows up next to another character and goes, no time to explain, get in. And they like get in and they go to their destination and they very clearly had enough time to explain it, but they just didn't.
Yeah, but also maybe the author wanted to use a different opportunity to explain what's happening.
I just then don't write that. Yeah. This happens a lot more in like movies and TV shows, but I actually saw it in the Sea of Monsters, which is what reminded me of it. And in the Sea of Monsters, they did it in a way that made sense, actually, where I believe it was Percy said, no time to explain to Annabeth. Annabeth jumped in and they took off. And then while they were going to where they were going, he explained what was happening. And the reason he said no time to explain is because they were being attacked or something like that. So then they just took off. Or I think it was actually Annabeth saving Percy. So that is an instance where it makes sense. But the part that whenever it doesn't is like when they show up somewhere. This happens a lot more in movies and TV shows, but they'll do that exact same thing. But instead of having a scene in the vehicle or in the transportation on their way to the place discussing what just happened, it'll show the next scene where they're just at the place and now they're discussing everything. And so your mind as a watcher or a reader is supposed to just ignore that travel sequence because that's what you should do. But at the same time, I can't get over just like, then what were they doing in the car the whole time? Just like sitting there in silence, like everyone's scrolling on their phones or something? Like, wouldn't you be discussing the craziness that just happened?
Yeah, I think so.
I think my thing is like, if you can find a way to avoid having to do that scene or that piece of dialogue, it's just better. Like, I'm trying to think of a great, or not a great, but at least a good alternative, which is maybe just saying we'll explain when we get back. Like, even that's better than there's no time to explain, because there literally is time to explain. There's even shows that have done jokes about that, where they're like, there's no time to explain. And then, like, something will happen, and then he's just like, oh, I guess there was time to explain. And, like, so I've seen that too, but I just can't stand those 4 words together. Give me the ick.
I guess I don't feel as passionately about that as you do. But okay, I can see why. And I just have one final hot take / ick. I don't really know. This is just something that needs to be said in this episode because I've seen a lot of discourse about this online again. Audiobooks count as reading. Everyone can know that that is my stance. I am declaring audiobooks are reading.
So is the counter argument that they don't think listening to an audiobook is reading?
Correct, because you're not using your eyeballs. So you're not actively reading something.
Then what is it?
Listening, I guess.
Like,
with your ear holes.
I guess I don't understand what the...
People try to argue that if you only listen to audiobooks, you are not a reader because you are not actively using your eyes to read. But I think that is such an ableist thing to say because not everybody has the ability to use their eyes to read.
Yeah, what about like blind people?
Yeah, if someone is blind or they just have some sort of disability that allows them to not be able to physically read, they can still listen to the audiobook and it still counts as reading the book. It's just another form of reading.
I'm just confused on what people would classify it as. Like a radio show, a podcast? Like, what do you classify it as an audio book? Because then, sure, I guess you could say it's not reading a book, it's listening to a book, which is how it got the name audiobook. But
the counter arguments are not very strong. Also, sometimes people just enjoy listening to books in their cars instead of the radio.
True, yeah, that's what I was going to say. Not a lot of people have the actual like time, think of like parents that are trying to take care of their kids.
Right. They want to listen to stories.
Right.
Fine, but they're still like reading. It counts as reading, I think. Like you're not using your eyeballs to do it, but you're still absorbing the story.
Right. You are still literally word for word getting the information that is in the story. I would count that as reading. Because reading is just an avenue for absorbing the story.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, you're just listening to it to absorb the story.
So anyone who counter argues that, unfortunately, that is an opinion that I will not be listening to.
Oh, nice. It's clever.
I wasn't even meaning to do that.
Well, I liked it.
I'm glad I can make unintentional puns. So I think that wraps up our bookish hot takes and or bookish icks. Some of them fit into both categories. Some of them were more hot take-ish than others. But again, we agree to disagree. So if you disagree with us, kindly do not let us know because we have agreed to disagree.
I agree to those terms.
So before we sign off, what are you reading this week?
This week, I am continuing down the road of ACOTAR. I'm also highly debating putting on the next Percy Jackson onto my wish list or wait list. What is it called? Hold list.
Your Libby holds?
Yes. So too many lists. But right now, focusing ACOTAR. I want to make sure to get that done before I jump into anything else.
Yes, you definitely do have to get it done. I started an advanced reader copy of 4 Weekends and a Funeral by Ellie Palmer. I only got 4% in, so I'm not really 100% sure what is happening. I'm not 100% sure if I'm going to enjoy the book just yet because getting 4% into a book tells me nothing. But I did learn that this obviously takes place. The opening scene is at a funeral for some influencer guy. So we'll see how this goes.
Sounds interesting.
I requested it on NetGalley a really long time ago because everyone was requesting it. And I was like, well, maybe this is like a super anticipated read. And also the title was very intriguing. 4 Weekends and a Funeral. What do you mean?
Right.
So I got it. It's supposed to be a romance. I think it's starting very dark though. I mean, with a funeral. So we'll see how it goes. I am intrigued. I'm liking the writing style. It's not too cringeworthy for me. Sometimes I start like arcs of romance books or whatever, and the writing is just very meh. This one, it's promising. So even though I'm only 4% in, I will keep going. That is the plan, to keep going. My rule is I need to get at least 30% into a book before I declare it a DNF.
That's fair. Gives it ample opportunity to pull itself back.
I feel like it gives it a fair chance because if I'm 30% into a book, I'm a third into a book, I should have a clear idea of where the plot is going. I should know pretty much all of the characters. Maybe not all of them. Maybe some get introduced at like 50%. That's fine. But I should have the tone of the book down by 30%.
Yeah, I think so. And then at the same time, if you're just really not vibing with it, you've also haven't wasted, that much time. It's not like you got 80% of the way through the book.
That's true. And I have known people that have DNF'd at 80%. And I'm like, you might as well just finish it.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I did with that book called Random, where it got to the point where I just started skipping chapters and just like skimming through it because I was so sick of it.
Yeah, you see, I don't do that. If I know I'm going to skim, I don't finish it.
I just really wanted to know the ending, and it was terrible, and I wish I just closed the book and never picked it up again. But
well, that happens sometimes. But I'm excited to continue reading my book. Very much looking forward to that. It's going to be very hot out here for the next few days, so I'll be doing a lot of inside reading. But I hope everybody has a fantastic week. As always, go read a good book, get some outside time. We're a big fan of fresh air over here, and happy reading.